John Rentoul's here, chief political commentator at The Independent. John, very good morning to you.
Good morning, Mike. It's good to hear you being so positive about Keir Starmer and his negotiating triumph.
Listen, you know me, John. I'm a very fair-minded man. You know, I will give him credit where credit is due. And obviously, I mean, it's not quite as sold. I mean, it's not quite the brilliant deal that he keeps saying that it is. But what I find interesting, and this is where I would like to see your view, it seems to me that Donald Trump has kind of slightly shackled Keir Starmer in what he can now do from this moment on, because it seems that if he aligns himself too closely to the EU, that will kibosh some of the stuff that he's got from America. And he's also been told you can't get too cosy with China either.
Well, that's right. Well, we have to see the small print on that.
Yeah.
It has been suggested that we have agreed to align ourselves with the US against China, and that we would impose the same tariffs that the US is imposing on China. If so, that's quite a big concession. But the overall picture, Mike, as you know, is that Keir Starmer has negotiated two huge trade deals in 2 days, and they will benefit everyone in this country. I mean, not by a huge amount, but I mean, certainly.
I mean, I think there's
a free trade agreement with India is a huge opportunity.
Yeah, I think the Indian one's a bit more problematic, but we can come back to that. But just to keep on the China reference, according to a piece in the Telegraph today, the White House has asked for assurances from the UK that any steel and pharmaceutical products exported to the US do not originate in China. So, I mean, there's a slight kind of caveat there, isn't there? So make sure
that sounds perfectly reasonable.
No, it does sound very reasonable.
Don't have a problem with that.
It sounds very reasonable, but it doesn't feed well into the Starmer mantra, which is that China has been probably the most visited destination of all countries by government ministers from this country since they got in July. David Lammy's been there, Rachel Reeves went there. There's been an awful lot of activity going on. I think Jonathan Reynolds went there as well before he began running British Steel, maybe to pick up a few tips. I don't know. But basically, an awful lot of you would think a lot of activity has been done in terms of trade between China and the UK.
Well, that's a good thing. We're in favour of free trade, Mike. And
I'm not.
We've now got okay.
No, not in favour of free
You're
trade.
In favour of being
no, I'm not in favour of free trade if the free trade allows China to come in and ruin every market that we've got, because they could undercut us. And you know as well as I do that the Department of Defence has now said if you've got a Chinese electric car, you're not allowed to park it anywhere near a Department of Defence building for fear of all the interference that they can run, and because of all the bugging they can do.
And you mustn't charge your mobile phone in your car. But obviously, you've got to be careful with China. But nobody's suggesting.
Well, you mean like a Ming vase, that kind of careful?
Well, that would do. But nobody's suggesting that we should cut off relations with China. And it is a huge market that we want to have access to.
But do we sell? I mean, I don't know. I mean, I don't know whether you know. Do we sell much stuff to China?
We do. We sell pink Bentleys, because I've been up to the Bentley car production line in Crewe.
Pink Bentleys. So how many pink Bentleys can you make, though? You can't make that many.
You can make an awful lot, and you can sell them for vast amounts of money to these Chinese princelings.
Yeah. I walked past. This is just apropos of nothing, but I was hanging around in Mayfair the other day. I walked past a Rolls-Royce dealership, right, and they've got a new Rolls-Royce in the window, which appears to be a sort of sporty-looking Rolls-Royce, £445,000. And I was going, for a car? Are you joking?
these are amazing products. I mean, people will pay an awful lot for them, and that's why we want to sell them to America.
Yeah.
And that's why it was a good deal that Keir Starmer got yesterday, because we'll be able to sell 100,000 of these fancy cars to America at low tariffs.
Yes. No, listen, I'm not against any of that, and I think that's a good thing. But on the face of it, particularly if you look at Donald Trump's tweet, the White House tweet that came out, tariffs are still better now for the American side than they are for the British side.
That's a bit of American propaganda.
Well, no, it's not propaganda. The numbers are there. The tariff rate on British products going into America is still higher than it was before Donald Trump was president, and the tariff rate on American goods coming into Britain is lower than it was.
Yeah.
So therefore, it is better for America. There's nothing wrong with admitting that, is there?
Well, no, it's not better for America
How?
because free trade is in everybody's interest.
Yes, no, I know,
I mean,
but the
Donald
tariffs
Trump
that
can
we're
Trump can
paying higher
try and
tariffs than he
produce
is.
something on social media that looks as if America's got a good deal, but everybody knows that free trade is in everybody's interest, and you know, the fact that we haven't got proper free trade, the fact that these tariffs are still there is a bad thing, but Keir Starmer has achieved a negotiating triumph. He's got a trade deal with America, which previous 4 prime ministers wanted to get and couldn't get.
Yeah.
He's delivered it.
But there weren't any tariffs.
Not
there.
only that, he's delivered a deal with India, which previous prime ministers were desperate to do by Diwali in 2022.
Yeah.
And he's also got a deal with the EU
Yeah,
coming
but the
up
reason
in a couple of weeks.
Yeah, but the reason the Indian deal didn't get done with Kemi Badenoch was because they wanted to have the national insurance exemption, which she wouldn't grant them. And
No, that's not true. She agreed that.
That's now been granted. That's why the deal's been done. But let me give you some...
No, that's not true, Mike.
Well, it is true. Yes, it is, actually.
She didn't agree it because they wanted visas, which she said no to. Jonathan Reynolds said no to it, and the Indians agreed.
But the problem is that this has now opened the floodgates, if you like, for people to bring
it hasn't. No,
yes, it has. Because you
hasn't
can
changed the visa regime at all.
No, but you don't need a visa. You can come in to this country as an Indian, as a temporary worker. You can have the right to vote here. You can have the right to live here for 3 years, and you can have the right to live here without paying national insurance. And normally speaking, those kinds of reciprocal agreements are only done with countries where an awful lot of British people go backwards and forwards to those countries, like America.
Yeah.
But people don't go and work. I've never worked in India. I don't know about you. There's not that many people going to India from here to work. But let me come back.
I don't know the numbers, but I mean, the Indian market is a huge opportunity for British companies. And
well, you're not going to sell many pink Bentleys to India, are you?
Well, you don't know, Mike. I mean,
I
don't know what we sell to India, but I mean, there is.
We give them foreign aid for a start. Are we going to stop giving them that?
Well, I think the foreign aid budget has been cut, hasn't it? So I imagine
but it hasn't been completely. It hasn't disappeared. But let me give you some numbers.
No, it hasn't disappeared because we're spending it all on asylum seekers in Britain.
Well, there is a bit of that. How about these numbers for you, right? It's basically said that the tariffs on the US were 5.1% on average, and now
I know what it's. I know what it says, Mike.
Well, hang on. You said
propaganda. There's no point reading that.
No, it's not propaganda. These are the figures of the tariffs. I'm just saying that the Americans are better off than the British are. Why can't you just accept that?
No, they're not. They're not.
Well, why don't you let me say the numbers then?
Why don't I say imposing tariffs?
Well, why don't I say the numbers and everybody else can judge, right? Rather than you trying to shut it down. 5.1% was the average tariff, which has now gone down to 1.8%, which is what the Americans will pay. US tariffs on the UK were 3.4% before Trump took office, and are now basically 10%. So, you know, it's still I'm not arguing that it's not a good thing that we've done a deal. I'm just saying that it's more beneficial to America than it is to the UK. That's all.
No, that's not. That's absolutely not true.
Well, on those numbers,
the point is what Keir Starmer has achieved is he's reduced the tariffs that
he has reduced them. That's right.
That Trump imposed. So we are better off. We are going to be better off than we would have been if
we're better off than we would have been. Yes, we're better off than we would have been, but not better off than we were before Trump came in with the tariffs.
That's Donald Trump's fault because he's gone and imposed tariffs on all countries in the world.
You can't deny
that we have got a reduction in our tariffs.
Yes, that's true. But why can't you just admit that but our reductions on tariffs are actually bigger, so that he's paying even less money in a tariff than he was, right?
Because that doesn't make any sense. I mean, that's irrelevant.
It's not irrelevant.
We are worse off now because Donald Trump has imposed tariffs on all countries in the world. But we have managed to secure some discounts on our tariffs.
But the discount is bigger.
We're better off than we were.
Yes, I agree with you.
The day before yesterday.
But I'm agreeing with you. But the point is that you must also agree with me that the tariff on American goods coming into Britain has been lowered, far lower than the tariff that we're paying to go into America. That's all. That's all I want you to admit.
Well, but it doesn't make it. That's irrelevant.
I just want you to admit that it's true.
That was the position before this deal, Mike.
No, it wasn't. No,
yes, it was. Because
the tariffs before. No, the tariffs before this deal for American goods coming to Britain were higher. They were 5.1%. They're now 1.8%. So that's a fact.
Thing. Yeah.
Well, it may be a good thing. I just want you to agree that the American deal is better than the British deal. That's all.
No,
you're not going to admit that.
No,
all right.
No,
will you admit? All right. Will you admit that it's a better deal now that we're out of the European Union? Because without that, we wouldn't have got the deal.
Yeah, I think that is probably true, and we wouldn't have.
Well, that is true.
Been able to do that deal with.
It's not probably true. The Indian deal and the American deal both done because we left the European Union.
Yeah. So all the Brexiteers should be praising it instead of finding fault. I mean, Kemi Badenoch's attempt to pretend that this is some kind of, that the Indian deal and the US deal are sort of bad deals is pathetic. And I think she should change line and agree with Jacob Rees-Mogg, who's welcomed them both.
Yeah, well, Jacob Rees-Mogg's a very interesting character, and he's very much a man who's in charge, who loves free trade. So now that he's actually he's praising a deal which is not about free trade, it's quite interesting. But that's another story. Let's talk about reform, though, because I don't think I've spoken to you since last Friday when the results of the elections came in. Quite a staggering result for reform, I think bigger than even they were expecting. And it's going to have a few reverberations, isn't it? I mean, we've already seen Keir Starmer this week coming out with all manner of sort of what you might have called right-wing policies about migrants, you know, saying that you're all going to have to speak English now when you come here, which if the Tories had said that a couple of years ago, they'd have been denounced as Nazis and fascists. You know,
no, that's not true.
Yeah, they would. Of course they would.
All governments have said that, and they always.
Yeah, but the Labour government have never said it.
Release.
The Labour government have never said it.
Yes, they did.
They've also said.
No, they did.
They've also said they now want to bring an end to the crazy judges on the immigration panels who have been giving the right to stay in this country to people who should be deported for being criminals. You know, this is all as a direct result. This was not anything that they had planned. Surely, all as a direct result of reform winning. And people in the Labour government and Labour Party warning, don't jump to the right just because of Nigel Farage, but they have.
Well, no, I mean, I wouldn't describe it as left and right. I mean, the British people want immigration to be controlled. They want fair and firm rules, and reform have benefited from the fact that the last Tory government betrayed them terribly on that issue.
Totally right. Yeah, absolutely. But the point is surely now that this is a Labour government that even 2 years ago, John, and you know this is true, even 2 years ago, very much held the belief that, you know, people coming to this country had absolute rights to be here, absolute right to claim asylum, absolute right to seek a better life. That is not now the Labour view.
No, that's true. And what's changed is that, you know, Boris Johnson let in net immigration of nearly 1 million. Yeah.
As did Rishi Sunak.
22, 23.
Yeah.
Anyway, I mean, a huge spike in net immigration. Nobody's. Well, there may be some people who support that, but that is very much a minority view, even in the Labour Party.
Yeah, but until recently, when it became a sort of crisis, basically a lot of people, including left-wing lawyers and human rights lawyers like Keir Starmer and Lord Hermer, would have stood on the shores of Dover with a welcome refugees sign. And in fact, I can show you Yvette Cooper holding one up if you want. You know, they all did it because they all thought that was the right thing to do. Now they don't.
Yeah. No, that's right. And, they are, the Labour government regards reform as the main opposition.
Yes.
That's not new.
Pat McFadden said, did he not this week, that we're now in the fight of our lives against Nigel Farage to stop him getting into power.
Absolutely. I mean, that was the view in Number 10 before Thursday last week. But I mean, what happened on Thursday was far worse than anybody in the Labour Party expected, far worse than the Tories expected, and far better than Reform expected. I remember, journalists were making fun of Reform for failing to manage expectations because Nigel Farage was going around saying we're going to do quite well. In the end, they did.
But that's the problem, isn't it? There's so many journalists have got so much wrong over the years politically. That's where we are where we are. I'm unfortunately one of those who can claim to have been right all along.
Well, you're always right.
You know, thank you, John. We'll clip that and use it at some point in the future. But I mean, more bad news really for Kemi Badenoch, isn't it, as well? Because it looks as though I don't know if you saw this projection for, and I know that there are many reasons why you wouldn't necessarily project it absolutely like this, but a projection of last Thursday's vote in a general election gives the Tory party something like 7 seats.
Well, yeah, but I mean, you can't project that. I mean, the next election's a long way off, but it could be worse than that. I mean, the Tories could just be wiped out altogether.
I think they're on the brink, honestly.
Yeah, no, I think they are, and I think they're very worried. I mean, I think that the result was extremely bad for the Tories and for Labour. I mean, you got to remember Labour. I mean, Nigel Farage has made this point. Labour in 2021, which is when these seats were last fought, did so badly that Keir Starmer thought of resigning,
Yeah.
and yet he managed to lose 2/3 of the seats that they held then. So it was a very, very bad night for both the main parties. But in the end, I think the Labour Party can rely on a core vote, which would never go to reform. So it can always rely on having a certain number of seats in Parliament, whereas the Tories don't have that guarantee, because their votes could just disappear like the mist in the morning.
Yeah, absolutely. It's going to be fascinating. Excellent stuff. Good to see you, John. Thank you very much indeed. John Rentoul, Chief Political Commentator at The Independent.